They handed me the envelope like it contained something worth reading. No meeting, no handshake, just a sterile PDF in my inbox titled Annual Compensation Adjustment. I opened it while the Keurig sputtered beside me. Line by line, my eyes locked on one number 2100. I blinked. It was supposed to be 25,000. My projection was clear. The performance matrix even clearer. I had outperformed every portfolio manager in Q4, reducing municipal exposure by 6 points and restructuring liabilities across 3 cities. $2, $100 was not just insulting, it was absurd. That's when I felt the presence. Behind me, Dorian Clive, Vice President of Strategic Accounts, leaned against the doorway like a smirk in human form. "Hell of a year, Elena," he said, voice dripping with casual arrogance. "Tough market, lean margins. You know how it is." I turned silently. He tapped the side of my screen with his index finger. "Still, you should be grateful for that pocket change. Plenty of folks didn't get a bonus at all." Then he walked away, whistling something off-key. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I didn't speak. I didn't curse. I didn't email HR. Instead, I opened the internal promotion map, the succession matrix we'd spent 3 months building. There, in bold gray columns, was the shortlist for the Chief Investment Officer transition. My name, once listed second, was now gone. Replaced by Emery Dane. 2 years in municipal assets, missed 3 filing deadlines. I closed the window, stared at my reflection in the screen. Still me, still 46, still the one who kept this division afloat during the Boston Transit budget crisis. Still invisible, apparently. That night, I didn't go home. I went to the storage unit. I hadn't touched the safe in years. It took a code, a key, and a fingerprint. Inside, wrapped in legal plastic and my father's handwriting, were files I'd never fully read. Documents sealed with a trust lawyer's ribbon. Bonds. Municipal ones. And attached to them, a clause I hadn't thought about since I was 30. A clause that no one at Halverton remembered existed. But I did now. And it was still valid. My father was never one for sentimental inheritance. No watches, no letters, no dramatic last wishes, just legal folders labeled, cross-referenced, notarized, and stored in a fireproof safe. The file in my hand was thick-cornered in navy leather and embossed with the seal of Garrick Strauss and Partners, his legacy firm before the buyout. The top page was familiar. I remembered glimpses of it when he was alive, mentioned in passing over coffee. We both took black. It was a bond ledger, but not just any. 17 separate holdings. Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey. Acquired between 1990 and 2006. Public infrastructure notes, mostly tied to water systems, school districts, and light rail projects. I flipped further. That's when I saw it, Clause 9. Succession and breach provision. It was buried in the legal boilerplate, the kind of paragraph no analyst bothers to read unless something's on fire. But my father had highlighted it in red. In the event that the managing institution demonstrates material breach of fiduciary standards, as defined by the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, the bondholder reserves the right to demand early redemption at face value, plus interest, plus penalty acceleration. My breath caught. Each bond, each one, was currently managed by Halverton Capital. The math began forming before I even reached for the calculator. Principal plus compound interest, penalty clauses, adjusted for holding periods, roughly $47 million, $47 million contractually claimable, if I could prove what I already suspected, that Halverton, in its chase for margins and fees, had breached those very standards. It wasn't just a theory anymore. It was buried in plain sight, and it had my signature inherited through blood and notarized lines. I hadn't come here tonight to wage war. I came to remember who I used to be before this job made me shrink. But maybe Garrick Strauss left more than just money. Maybe he left me the tool I wasn't supposed to use unless someone pushed too far. And someone just had. The first time I heard Marielle's name, it came from the elevator, two account managers whispering like hallway gossip was currency. She flagged a markup in the Springfield contract, one said. Didn't even last the quarter. Yeah, the other replied, you don't last long when you question fee structures around here. I didn't say anything. Just pressed the button for the 14th floor and smiled like I hadn't heard a thing. But I remembered Marielle Kwan, sharp, quiet, always scribbling in margins during budget meetings, asking questions no one else dared voice. She interned in municipal ops before they gave her a probationary analyst title. I'd noticed how her graphs were too clean, how her projections matched mine almost exactly once without access to the final models. That kind of instinct didn't lie. I pulled her last submitted report from the internal archive. It had been reassigned to team ownership scrubbed of her name. But the fingerprint remained. I found a flagged section on the Western Mass Light Rail refi with redline comments questioning amortization lengths and fee percentage escalations. It matched the exact scheme I'd uncovered in the Worcester refinancing, where Halverton extended bond terms by 6 years, driving up total interest by $2, $8 million, all while raising their annual servicing fee by 14%. That kind of math wasn't accidental, it was predatory, and Marielle had seen it too. Her termination had been quiet, no goodbye email, no desk cleanout, just a calendar that went from book to blank overnight. I checked the HR database. Voluntary departure was all it said. They erased her like they tried to erase me. But unlike me, Marielle didn't have a safe full of legal grenades and a last name that still carried weight in old city contracts. I sat back and stared at the digital report. I wasn't just holding evidence of my own leverage now. I was holding the echo of someone else's silenced voice. And I wasn't going to let them bury her with a line of corporate HR language. I stopped sleeping the way normal people sleep. My nights belonged to spreadsheets, scanned contracts, and cross-tabulation grids that made my eyes blur by dawn. But somewhere between audit logs and archived memos, the pattern began to sharpen. It wasn't just Worcester. It was everywhere Halverton touched. Bridgeport, Lowell, New Haven, Stamford. Each city had a bond, restructuring pushed through under cost-saving adjustments, all extended maturity schedules, all subtle fee spikes wrapped in jargon-heavy disclosures. The interest totals over the life of each bond inflated. Quietly, consistently. And then there were the underwriters. The same 3 names kept appearing, all firms with documented relationships to Halverton's senior advisors. In one email chain from 2 years ago, I found a senior executive suggesting which underwriter to use on a Boston sanitation bond. The reasoning: their kickback is clean and they don't ask questions. That phrase alone would be worth its weight in arbitration. I organized everything into a single folder, Project Calyx, named after the outer structure that protects a flower before it blooms. Fitting. I was building a case to protect something fragile: public trust. Each entry had 3 layers city bond ID and suspected breach clause. At the top, I placed the inheritance documents from my father. Every succession clause was active, every bond traceable, every violation if proven in sequence enough to demand full redemption. The number at the bottom of the spreadsheet wasn't static anymore. It updated every hour as interest accrued. $47, $348, $102.17. And that was just the principal and penalties. The reputational cost if this went public would be incalculable. Halverton's municipal division wouldn't survive the hearings, not if the SEC and MSRB began poking. I'd seen the signs for years and looked away. We all did. But now, between my father's legal foresight and Marielle's erased work, I had something more than suspicion. I had leverage backed by contract, and that meant the clock wasn't just ticking for me anymore. It was ticking for them. Delphine Cruz didn't flinch when I slid the file across her desk. She didn't smile either, which I took as a good sign. Her office sat on the 27th floor of a building too old to be fashionable, too expensive to be accidental. The blinds were half closed against the Boston skyline, casting clean diagonal lines across her desk. Walnut, no clutter, just precision. She read in silence for 12 minutes. When she reached the succession clauses, she tapped her burgundy heel against the marble. "Well," she said, flipping back a page, "your father didn't trust many people, did he?" "No," I said. "He trusted structures, paper, process." Her eyes didn't leave the contract. Smart man. I sipped the coffee her assistant brought me. It was cold by then, but I didn't care. My stomach was too wired for heat. "These clauses," she said, finally leaning back, "are surgical. The definitions align with the MSRB's own breach guidelines. Material, measurable, and dated. What you've compiled here, if even half of it holds Halverton, is in default on every bond your father bought. All of it holds. Then we move." She turned her screen and began dictating a draft. Notice of material breach and redemption demand addressed to Halverton Capital's board CEO, compliance officer, and head of municipal operations. Language clear, calm, and devastating. We'll send it by certified courier CC the municipal regulators and timestamp everything. "This isn't a whisper," she said, glancing at me. "This is a bell you can't unring." I nodded once. She slid the signature page toward me. I didn't hesitate. My pen met the paper before my doubt could catch up. The ink dried fast. So did the silence between us. Delphine folded the documents with the quiet efficiency of someone used to ending careers before lunch. As she sealed the envelope, she looked at me, not with sympathy, but with clarity. "You understand, once this leaves the building, the game changes." I straightened my blazer and reached for the door. "That's the point," I said, and I meant every word. It was almost by accident that I found the memo, buried inside a backup folder labeled Bond Migration 2015 beneath a dozen spreadsheets and audit summaries no one had touched in years. It wasn't even titled properly, just internal Q3 notes. ED Emery Drummond, Halverton's former chief financial officer, retired abruptly 2 years before I joined the executive floor with a farewell party that felt oddly muted for someone with 2 decades of institutional memory. I'd always assumed he'd simply aged out like so many others, but I was wrong. The memo was short 3 paragraphs. The second one stopped me cold. Several of the municipal bonds inherited through third-party trusts contain succession clauses that could be activated in the event of a fiduciary breach. Recommend legal review and compliance audit. Exposure could exceed 40 $40 if triggered. It was dated September 14, 2015. 3 months later, Emery Drummond was gone. No audit ever happened. No review either. But the file had been opened once more 3 years later. The access log showed one name, Dorian Clive. He'd seen it. He'd known. And he'd buried it. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it all settling like dust. They didn't miss it. They didn't forget. They saw the clauses, ran the numbers, and chose to roll the dice. They bet that no one would remember that the bondholder would stay quiet, that no one inside the company would be brave or stubborn enough to connect the dots. They weren't wrong. Until now. I opened a blank email and typed only one sentence. "You weren't wrong. You were just early." I printed it, folded it, and slipped it into a small envelope, along with a single pressed forget-me-not clipped from my balcony garden that morning. I mailed it to Marielle Kwan, care of her old apartment. No return address, no signature, just quiet confirmation that someone had finally heard her, and someone was about to make sure they never buried another voice again. The notice landed at Halverton's executive suite at 9:06 a.m. on a Thursday. By 9:27, I counted 4 people sprinting across the glass hallway outside the boardroom. 2 in legal, 1 in risk. One I didn't recognize but wore panic like perfume. At 9:41, my inbox pinged with a mass internal memo. All municipal division staff to remain available for immediate departmental briefings. I deleted it. At 10:12, I watched through the translucent boardroom wall as Dorian Clive stood at the head of the table, red-faced and gesturing at a projection slide. He clearly hadn't prepared himself. His posture had changed. The lazy confidence had cracked. He looked like a man arguing against gravity. By 11 Aura whispers spread like ash, the firm was being accused of material fiduciary breach. Not one, multiple, 47 million worth. I sat in my office and sipped tea while the fire built. One intern from strategy knocked on my door, eyes wide, voice hushed. "Is it true?" I looked at her for a moment and said gently, "You should ask compliance. They're doing a lot of explaining today." Dorian tried to get ahead of it by calling an impromptu staff meeting. He opened with the words, "This is nothing more than a personal attack by a former employee dissatisfied with her bonus." I didn't attend the meeting, but I watched the recording when it leaked later that afternoon. His voice cracked when someone from accounting asked about the clause language. His answer didn't land. By 2:00 p.m., a partner at Langley Rowe Halverton's primary municipal investor requested an emergency call with the CEO. Not legal, not Dorian, the CEO. By 4 the firm's valuation had dipped just enough to trigger investor alerts. The municipal team canceled all client calls for the next 3 days, and I went home early. I'd done my part, sent my envelope, pulled the pin. Now I would wait to see how many tried to hold the grenade. The invitation came at 7:02 a.m. Sharp. Subject line, private meeting. Cassandra Vale. No assistant, no scheduling window. Just a room number and the instruction, bring only yourself. I arrived at 8:00 on the dot. Cassandra Vale didn't rise when I entered. She simply gestured to the seat across from her, not with hostility, but with the strained composure of a woman who'd been up all night, being told uncomfortable truths by overpriced lawyers. "Mrs. Strauss," she said, voice clipped, but not unfriendly. "Let's speak plainly." I nodded once. "Let's." She tapped a red folder on the table. "Your filing is precise. Calculated. It's accurate." A pause. "What do you want?" The question didn't need a preamble. Neither did my answer. Dorian Clive resigns. Immediately. His name doesn't appear in any statement memo or narrative version of what happens next. Her eyes flickered, but didn't blink. Every municipal bond under our management is to be reviewed and contracts restructured where debt burdens were artificially extended. Full transparency, city by city. She started writing. Audits will be quarterly, conducted independently, and public. Understood. Lastly, I said, folding my hands, you'll convert the 47 million redemption into a 5-year consulting arrangement. Under a public integrity mandate, I'll oversee implementation of fiduciary compliance across every municipal account. On paper, I become an advisor. In function, I clean house. She looked at me long and hard, not with disbelief, but with the quiet calculation of someone measuring cost against exposure. That's not a small ask. It's not a small breach. She leaned back, exhaled through her nose, and finally nodded. I'll present it to the board this afternoon. You'll present it as already agreed, or I move to arbitration. Another pause. Noted. I stood. I'll expect paperwork within 48 hours. And Dorian, I turned to the door. By the time I'm back on Monday, I never want to hear his name again. And with that, I left her office and walked into a building where for the first time, no one knew what game I was playing anymore. Marielle was back by Tuesday. No fanfare, no announcement, just her name quietly reappearing in the system. Her ID badge reactivated like it had never been disabled. I saw her in the cafeteria seated alone with her notebook and a steady hand, same as before. I nodded once as I passed. She didn't need a speech. She already understood. By Thursday, 2 more names surfaced. Analysts I hadn't spoken to in months both had documented concerns about bond structures, but shelved them after being warned not to overcomplicate deliverables. Now they were walking into compliance briefings carrying full dossiers. I didn't host town halls or send out mission statements. There was no rebrand, just work. quiet, methodical corrective work. We rewrote how municipal assets were evaluated. Fee disclosures moved to the front of contracts. Risk assessments were reviewed externally. No one in my division submitted a proposal without a dual verification process signed by an independent ethics officer. Cassandra sent a memo commending the progress. I didn't reply. My new office sat 3 floors above where I used to work, a corner suite left vacant after the last strategic director resigned without a statement. I didn't redecorate, just added 1 shelf, 1 plant, and 1 framed copy of Clause 9 from my father's trust documents. A reminder of the fine print they'd hoped I'd never read. Most days I stayed off the executive calendar. I wasn't there to be visible. I was there to be unmissable in outcome. The press never mentioned my name. When the restructuring was announced, it was pitched as a strategic modernization of fiduciary operations. Investors applauded, cities renewed. Cassandra smiled at cameras and spoke in sound bites. That was fine. Because inside Halverton, the rules had changed, and I was the one writing them. 6 months later, I stood in a conference room in Worcester's City Hall, walking a team of budget officers through our revised bond structuring model. The numbers spoke for themselves: $1.3 million in reduced interest liability, an 11% drop in annual servicing costs, and 0 exposure to rollover penalties. Across from me, seated at the edge of the room, was Halverton's newest vice president of municipal strategy. He didn't say much, just took notes and occasionally glanced up like he was waiting for correction. He reminded me of Dorian in posture, not in presence. He still believed his job was to speak. He hadn't learned yet when to listen. At the end of the audit session, the city's lead financial officer asked what had changed. What made Halverton pivot so dramatically, she said. We've never seen transparency like this. I paused, uncapped my pen, and smiled. 1 line, I said, 7 words. She waited, so I gave it to her. You should be grateful for that pocket change. A few chuckled. One man at the far end of the table let out a low whistle. I gathered my notes, nodded my thanks, and left the room before they asked anything else. The explanation didn't belong in the paperwork. It belonged in the silence that followed it. Back at Halverton, the quarterly report was already being finalized. Growth had stabilized. Investor confidence was cautiously optimistic. Municipal partners were signing 3-year extensions without hesitation. And the firm's name, once whispered with mistrust in city planning departments, now showed up on bid invitations again. No headlines bore my name. No plaques appeared on the walls. That wasn't the point. I walked past the glass office where I used to sit. It belonged to someone else now, a young analyst with sharp instincts and a nervous smile. She looked up and nodded. I nodded back. There's no announcement when power shifts. No celebration. Just a quiet transfer of weight from the loud to the prepared, from the ones who once demanded gratitude to the ones who rewrote the terms.